This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Dads from the Crypt.
Excuse me, what is Valkyrie?
Operation Valkyrie. The reserve army has thousands of men all over Berlin. Valkyrie is Hitler's contingency plan to mobilize those men during a national emergency.
The sole purpose of the order is to protect Hitler's government if he's cut off or killed.
And what use is this to us?
Valkyrie is designed to contain civil unrest. But what if the SS were staging a coup? State security is trying to overthrow Hitler. How would High Command respond?
We would have no choice. We would declare a military state of emergency.
Exactly, and initiate Valkyrie.
Hitler's own reserve army, using Hitler's own plan, will have no choice but to seize power in Berlin to prevent the SS takeover. They'll think they're fighting for Hitler's government, not against it.
While we quietly put a new government in place.
But only if he's dead. That's what you're saying, isn't it? How else are you going to convince people the SS are trying to seize power?
We have to kill Hitler.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special episode of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. I'm Alan Katz.
And I'm Gil Adler.
But before we begin this very special episode, we want to remind you to please hit the like button if you like. And even better, subscribe, why don't you? Today, we're going to talk about a movie that Gil and I really haven't talked about much before. It's a big movie on Gil's resume.
Hitler's Germany has seen its last sunrise.
It's called Valkyrie.
What makes you think you're stronger than the very momentum of history?
Where the project originated was with, I think, Chris McQuarrie was in Berlin doing research on another project, and he kind of happened upon the von Stauffenberg story and couldn't put it down, as it were. Is that how it went?
Well, he had done some research, and he brought in Bryan, and then Bryan came to me one day and asked me, did I know the story of Klaus von Stauffenberg? And I didn't. I knew nothing.
Now, as to how you even got here, you were, at this point, you were doing movies for Warner Brothers. You were doing their tentpole movies. You had done, was that Starsky and Hutch? Was that one of them? Was that?
Yeah, we did Starsky and Hutch. We did Constantine, and we were on Superman.
All right. So you'd done Superman Returned. Superman Returned had not come out yet, had it?
No, I think we were still shooting Superman Returns when Bryan first came over to me and he said, do you know anything about this story? And I said, no. And he asked me if I would look into it. And, I have, since I made the movie, I rarely talk about the making of this movie because to me, it was an extremely painful experience. And when I first finished the movie and people were asking me talking about the making of this movie or what I did or how I did it, I found it very difficult to figure out what initially to say. And so I finally figured out what to say in 2 sentences that told everything. And I apologize if this sounds like I'm a stand-up comic, but this is what I would say. Ready? Here we go. 2 Jews and a Scientologist decide to go to Berlin to make a movie about the guy who tried to kill Hitler. You see the problems we had? I mean, right away, you get a sense of, holy shit, what are these guys, crazy? But that's really what we started out with. And even before we had a script, we just had the idea of it. And we had gone to Warner Brothers because we had made many movies there and they were interested in keeping Bryan there. And I suppose they were interested in keeping me there. And they agreed that they would put up $16 million if we made the movie, but not any more money than that. And it was going to be made with relatively all unknown people. Thomas Kretschmann, who is a really wonderful actor, he was going to be Stauffenberg. And we were proceeding in that direction.
According to Gil, Nathan Alexander, Valkyrie screenwriter Chris McQuarrie's assistant, did a lot of the research for and a fair amount of the writing of the Valkyrie script.
Before we even got to that point, Bryan and I were talking about, while we were making Superman, about the story and about how to tell it and making it really inexpensively. And And then when we came back, we were in the editing room, and one day Brian calls me up and he goes, "You're not going to believe what just happened." I said, "What?" He goes, "I just got a call from Tom Cruise." I said, what does he want?" And he said, "Well, he really wants to have a conversation about the Stauffenberg story." And he said, "So I'm going to go meet him to see what he wants to talk about." And when he came back, he said, Tom wants to finance the movie, and he wants to be in it, and he wants to play Stauffenberg.
What was your first thought upon hearing that? Because you had spent some time with the project, with the character.
Yeah. I said, "Brian, you understand that if Tom does the movie, it's no longer a $16 million budget. It's going to be 80, 90, $100 million budget, right? You understand that? Does he understand that?" And he said, yeah, he wasn't very concerned about that.
But okay, yes, the budget was going to react to Tom Cruise's presence, but how did you feel about Tom Cruise playing that character?
Well, that's the question I asked Brian as the director of it. I said, how do you feel about it? I mean, is this going to be more effective if we have Thomas playing Stauffenberg, because the story will be more about the story? If Tom does it, it's going to be, oh, Tom is playing Stauffenberg. And how do you feel about that? And we had a number of conversations about that. And then one day I got a call from Tom, and he said, "I need to meet you. I need to talk to you." And so I went over to his office, and we sat down, and he said, "Okay, every time I talk to Brian, he talks to me about you. Why is he talking to me about you?" And I said, "I don't know. Ask Brian." I said, "We had a good relationship on Superman. It was a really hard movie to make. I wanted to kill him most of the time. And I almost did a couple of times, and he almost killed me once or twice. Literally, I'm talking. And, we just are both passionate guys trying to make really good movies." And that sort of gave him confidence that maybe I was the right guy to make the movie with these guys. And then we started talking about the financing of it, and United Artists came in.
But still, before you went and did all this, how did you feel about him playing that character?
Well, I felt a couple of things. I felt, first of all, it puts it in a different class, and it puts it in a different league, and our audience will be bigger. And I'm always interested in movies that I make that we get as big an audience as possible, because if we don't get an audience and no one sees it, what's the point of making it? So from that perspective, I thought that it was a good idea. From the perspective of Tom Cruise playing Stauffenberg, I was a little weary. I was concerned. But I had a couple of more conversations with Tom, and the one thing that impressed me with what he had to say was he was as anxious as we were to tell the story as accurately as possible. He wasn't looking to take any shortcuts, or this was not a starring role for him. He really wanted to tell the story as honestly as we did. And when I say we, the writer and director and producer, that gave me great hope that this could be not only a good movie, it could be a great movie.
As you're weighing the calculus in your head at the beginning, at some point did you ask yourself, what might I be getting myself into here?
Every day. Even while we were doing it. The Scientology, I wasn't kidding when I told you at the beginning, 2 Jews and a Scientologist.
Yeah,
it was true. It was true. And we suffered some slings and arrows along the way because of that. It wasn't an easy journey.
It's just looking at it critically for the moment as a piece of casting. It's not a bad casting choice. Just, as we've discussed, the last thing on earth we want actors to do on camera is to act. It really is. Who they are is really important. And there's something conflicted inside Tom Cruise. Von Stauffenberg was extremely conflicted. He was German nobility. He was a practicing Catholic and a career army officer whose tentative support for Hitler before the war became outright resistance as the war dragged on catastrophically, and as von Stauffenberg learned what Hitler and the Reich's leadership were doing to the Jews.
And Stauffenberg was a very conflicted man. I mean, don't forget, whatever we think of Stauffenberg now and whatever my personal view is of Stauffenberg now, which I'll get to in a little while, he was a Nazi and he was in Africa. And he was realizing how wrong the leadership in Germany was for the German people. And that took him a while because he was fighting on the side of Hitler for many, many years and became a colonel, became very significant in Hitler's life. And so, you really can't dismiss that. What you can do is look at the full arc and say, oh, he finally came to the conclusion, for whatever reason, that what he was doing was not right for the German population and decided to do something about it, which most Germans didn't do. Even if they thought that way, they never decided to go against Hitler. Now, the one thing that most people don't understand is that there were 287 conspirators. It wasn't just a one-person game, and other conspirators had taken shots at destroying Hitler and failed miserably, and they then were executed. So it took some time. I mean, it didn't happen until, what was it, July 20th, 1944, where the attempt was had, and then the war ended within the year after. So Stauffenberg fought on behalf of the Nazis for much of the war.
Tom Cruise speaking naturally, without an accent. That was a great decision.
Is no longer to save my country, but to save human lives.
Well, I think we had a lot of conversations about that. As you say that, all of a sudden I remember this.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was Chris or Brian, maybe Brian, who finally came up, well, what if we start the show in German and we slowly, within a minute, half a minute, go from German to English, and now the audience is adjusted and we can do the rest of the movie in English.
Right.
And that was really an important decision to make, because it really made all the difference in the world in the audience accepting what we were putting out there. Early on, we went to Berlin. I think it might have been just Brian and myself, and maybe a designer. And we stayed at the Adlon Hotel, which was a very popular hotel in Nazi Germany. And it was elegant, and they've refurbished it, and it was bombed out, and it was refurbished, and it's right next to the Brandenburg Gate. And so we stayed at this hotel in all of its elegance. And there was a piano with a baby grand piano and a piano player playing in the lobby. And I couldn't help stand on the balcony after walking up the circular stairway and looking down at all the people, hustle and bustle, coming in and out of the hotel, thinking, this is 1940. What am I seeing? What am I feeling? What am I doing? And much of the movie, I had that kind of feeling. And that, I think, made it more difficult for me on a daily basis. So when we first got there, we would walk out of the Adlon Hotel, and we were getting into a car to take us to locations. And right across the street was a Jumbo Juice and a Baskin Robbins or Ben and Jerry's. And I would just stand there and I would laugh, and I would go, my God, look at where we are. To the left is the Brandenburg Gate. Straight ahead are these commercial stores, and we're getting into a modern car to go look at locations. And the first day we went on locations, we went to a place on Jeepstrasse. Can't believe I remember the name. And the Jeepstrasse is a very narrow street, cobblestoned, still as it was all those years ago. And the buildings are like 5 stories high, with sort of slanted windows towards the top. And as we were walking by there, and we stopped at a Japanese restaurant next to it for lunch. And as I was getting out, I saw on the base of the building, they had names carved into the stone with dates. And I said to our location manager, I said, what's that all about? And he said, oh, those are names of Jews who lived in the building, and those are the dates that they were taken. And you'll see that in many of the buildings all over Berlin, which we did. And I remember finishing lunch and getting back into the van and thinking to myself, as I was waiting for the van to drive up, I could just see on this really narrow cobblestone street, I could just see German, vehicles driven by Nazis coming in to take Jews away. And as I looked up to the 5 stories high and these windows, which were sort of on an angle, I could actually, in my mind's eye, see people looking out that window, frightened to death, and wondering what's going to happen to them. And that followed me throughout the entire preparation and shoot of the movie. It was an interesting experience to feel that.
Being there haunted you.
It really did. It really did.
There were ghosts all over the place, and you saw them all.
One day I was sitting in my office, and we had the best set deck guy that I ever worked with.
That would be Bernard Henrik.
I've never worked with anyone so meticulous and wonderful. And his assistant came into my office one day, all smiley, and he said, "I have something to show you that I think you're going to want to see." And I said, "Oh, great. What is it?" And he popped down a picture in front of me, an 8x10 glossy of a man in a Nazi SS uniform. And I said, "What's this?" And he says, "That's my grandfather." And I said, "That's your grandfather? Wow. Why are you showing it to me?" "Oh," he said, "I thought you'd like to see it." And I said, "Well, it depends. Where's your grandfather now?" And he said, "He's dead." I said, "Oh, in that case, I'll be happy to look at it." But it was stuff like that that would just haunt me. One day we had a woman came in and said she had worked in the telegraph office. In the movie, you see that big telegraph office where all these people are putting out messages. She had worked in the office, and she said, and she was an elderly lady. She must have been, I think, 90. And she said stuff like, "Oh, yeah, I worked in that telegraph office that you're showing that you're building and you're going to show in the movie." And I said, "Oh, what was that like?" And she said, "Oh, it was okay. It was okay. But I got promoted and I became Hitler's secretary." And I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yeah." And she said, "He was a very good boss. He was very kind to us. He really was a very sweet man. And I loved him," saying this to me. At one point, we actually had a man who had been Hitler's, I guess, valet offer to be an assistant to us. And so we brought him in for a meeting. And Chris and Brian said, "Look, I don't think you should be at this meeting." And I said, "I think you're right. I don't think I'll do well. I don't want to meet this man." And he walked by my office and he walked into the other office. And then after it was all over, about a half hour, he left. And the two of them came into my office and they said, "Boy, are we glad you weren't there." And I said, "Listen, I have an idea, though. I think we should bring him back for a second interview and let him sit exactly where he was sitting with his back to the door. And I can sneak up behind him with some piano wire and just put it around his neck and pull." And they said, "Yeah, that's the reason why we didn't think it was a good idea for you to be at this meeting."
You were bringing a movie into Germany, making a movie in Germany about Germany. And were they happy to see you making that movie about Germany in Germany?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. The answer is yes and no, and then maybe yes again. And what I mean by that is when we first decided to make the movie, we could have made it in the back lot at Culver City. We could have done it anywhere. And we went to Budapest, Prague, and Berlin. And Brian and I, after looking at those places, decided and looked at each other and said, we sort of really feel that we need to be in the ether of where it all happened. And so we think we should make it in Berlin. And we both felt very strongly about that. And no one gave us any argument. They said, "Okay, yeah, fine." And part of that was a conversation that I had with the German authorities where I said, "Look, I told you that we're all very anxious to make this as authentic as possible. So I want to shoot the end of the movie exactly where Stauffenberg was assassinated. At that time, it was the War Ministry. Now it's the Museum for the Holocaust. And they said, oh, fine, well, we can make that happen, sure. And that was really important. And that was one of the main decisions why we decided to go to Berlin. Of course, when we landed and I started making plans, they said, oh, no, we can't. No, the museum is open to the public. And, no, we can't do that. And I was like, well, we're going to leave then. I'm going to go to Budapest. Fuck you, I'm getting out of here. And of course, we weren't about to do that.
Who did you take that to? All right, so you get this unexpected opposition, a change in plans on their part. All right, so you're the producer. Who do you take your complaint to?
Well, first, anyone who would listen. And I was just livid because I felt I'd been lied to intentionally.
All right, so there's Jeannie, your wife.
Yeah, and she was a big help because otherwise I probably would have taken that piano wire on somebody else.
But okay, so this is now to take us down into the producerial trenches.
Well, I go into the people from the location group and the people who originally we spoke to in the government, and they're no help. They can't do anything. Well, it's over our head. And so we realized we needed to go to the press. And luckily for us, there was a man named Franz Schirmacher, who ran a newspaper out of Frankfurt. I think it was called Fasde, which is a very conservative newspaper. And I can't remember who it was, but through some mutual people that we knew in Berlin, we actually got to Franz and we invited him up to where we were building sets. And he had lunch with us and with Tom. And it was like a 3-hour lunch.
You seduced him, did you?
And at the end of the conversation, at the end of the lunch, he said, I think you guys know more about German history than any German. And I will, because I'm hearing such a passion to tell this authentically, I will do whatever you want me to do to help you. Because this story needs to be told as honestly as you guys want to tell it. And we thanked him and thought, well, that's the end of that. And no, he wrote an editorial, which was kind of scathing, basically saying to the government, how could you not do everything you can do to help these guys make this movie? You're out of your mind. And within days, we got a call. I think we got a call from Dr. Wilhelm, who was Angela Merkel's secretary of whatever, saying that, we would work this out. And then we went into conversations with the government and the museum. Well, the only thing we could do was we would have access to the museum at 6 o'clock in the evening. And then Monday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning, it had to be spick and span and given back to them. Now, we had a lot to do to make it look like the 40s. We had to put in bunkers. We had an awful lot of set dressing and stuff. And so those were the terms. So we did it. And we said, okay, that's what we'll do. And we worked it out. And it was like a military plan, how we're going to get in, what we're going to do, how we're going to shoot. And we did it. We got in for that weekend. We shot. I had a 24-hour cruise, and the crews came in when we stopped shooting at 2 or 3 in the morning and cleared it up. At 9 o'clock in the morning, it looked like it was back to 2005.
Polaroids matched.
However, and we thought we had gotten it. And then 2 days later, we were using a lab in Munich.
Now this is the climactic scene where the hero dies.
Yes.
And shooting this scene, I imagine, was quite emotional.
Very emotional. Very difficult for all of us, including Tom, I think. I really think he felt what he was going through.
Where did you shoot the execution scene in the chronology? Was it towards the end of the shoot, or was it? All right. So in essence, you've all been with the character now for months and months and months. And yes, he's dead on the page, but now you're actually going to do it. There is something quite unsettling about that.
Hey! Long live sacred Germany!
It wasn't the last day of shooting. It was close to the end, but it wasn't the last day. And so we shot all this, gave it to the lab, moved on to another location. And then that was on Sunday. Monday morning, we gave them back the location. The lab had gotten the film on Sunday night. So Monday, they're working on it. Tuesday morning, I get a call. The lab called early today. They got to talk to you right away. I go, what do you mean? What happened? They won't say. They got to talk to you. So I get on the phone with them and I go, listen, we're really sorry. We destroyed the film. And I go, what? What do you mean you destroyed the film? How could you destroy the film? Well, we overbathed it. And I said, well, can you take back and rewash it? And no, it's destroyed, which meant I had to then reshoot that, which meant not only did I have an insurance claim that would take forever to iron out, but I had to go back to all those people that I had gotten permission from to do it on that weekend. I had to go back and reset another weekend, like 3 or 4 weeks down the road, to do it all over again, which we did. But it was a very painful process and was very painful. Every aspect of that was difficult and painful to do. And I must say, the other actors in the movie gave me great hope and really helped me a great deal. Thomas Kretschmann was a fantastic part of that process. He was always there when I needed him most to talk to. I remember one day, we're shooting 300 flags flying, Nazi flags flying in front of this building. And it happened to be Thomas Kretschmann's birthday as well. And so I had a cake made for him. But we're shooting, and we have to shoot it on a weekend. And probably what the audience doesn't know is you cannot fly a Nazi flag in Germany today at all. And here I had 300 flags flying in the daytime. So we had to go through incredible process of how we're manufacturing these flags, who's manufacturing these flags, how we're hanging them, who's going to destroy them when they're done. And we get them up, and we're shooting on a Sunday. And I look up and I see a tour bus with a Japanese tour bus. And they're all laughing and smiling. And then as they get close to what they're seeing and they see all of our flags, all their faces drop. And they're looking like, what the hell is going on here? And so the bus stopped, and I got on the bus to explain. And I said, look, I think you guys should get off the bus and just see, it's a set. It's not happening again. Don't worry. And, they got out. They met a couple of the actors, which was kind of fun. And then they got back on the bus. And then I had my cake in the middle of all these 300 flags. When we broke for lunch, we had brought out a cake and sang happy birthday to Thomas. Tom Wilkinson, who's a wonderful actor, was so nice about understanding the difficulties we were going through.
How do you mean? When you say that, what do you mean?
He was very understanding when I would make changes or we would have to make changes that would affect his schedule or what we were doing. They would just take it, and they didn't argue and say, oh, I want to do this, I got to do that. I mean, Terrence Stamp came to me one day and he said, I'm not working until Monday afternoon. I'm finished by like 2:00 on Friday. I want to fly back to London for the weekend. Now, my policy, generally speaking, when I make pictures is no one flies away, because I don't know if the plane is going to come back. I don't know if the plane is going to go down. I don't know if you're going to get back on time, if at all. But he convinced me that he was going to take the flight on Sunday, not on Monday. He would be back. And when he came back Monday morning, he called me into his trailer and he said, I have something for you. He gave me a bottle of hemp oil from what he calls the stamp collection. Now, if you go online, you can go to the stamp collection even today. And he sells health food products. And he said to me, this hemp oil, this is the best thing for your heart. Take a tablespoon every day. Your heart will thank you for the rest of your life. You know something? I take it, when I remember to take it, I take it almost every day, maybe every other day.
Still.
But Terrence brought that back for me, and we became buddies because of that. He was just such a delightful man. And especially since I made Superman, and he was in the original version of Superman as Zod, I just really, really loved talking to Terrence. He was such a delight.
There was Kenneth Branagh.
Kenneth was fantastic to work with, delightful man. And we had Eddie Izzard.
And that was the second time working with Eddie, because he had done an episode of Crypt when we were in London.
Right. And we had a great time with Eddie, and he remembered Crypt. They were just really good guys to work with, solid actors, want to do the job, want to get it right more than anything. And so it was all about the work. It wasn't about all the peripheral stuff that a lot of times you get involved in, which was such a relief.
Now, when one last concern that Germany had for Tom Cruise was the fact that he was a Scientologist, and you had to deal with that on a regular basis.
You think?
What I've read is that this was a fire that had to be put out on a regular basis.
Yeah, it sort of went away after a while. I mean, it wasn't all that terrible. It was initially, but then again, Brian and I, being two Jewish guys, it wasn't too easy there either. But we had things that you never would think would happen. For example, the very first day of shooting, we were on a tarmac that was actually used by Stauffenberg, and we had rented these vintage planes to be on the tarmac. And the tarmac, we had two tarmacs. One was grass and one was macadam. So on this first day of shooting, we were on the macadam tarmac. And, since we've had all this prep, I made sure, especially with the planes, we've got mechanics and we've got this and we've got that. And, we're set for every contingency imaginable, and we're going to get the shot done. And we, call time happens and everyone comes in and we're raring to go. And I get a call from the set. And they say, we can't shoot the planes today. And I go, you can't shoot the planes today. Why? Well, it's very, very hot out there. It's 105 degrees. And the macadam has melted. And the tires are rubber on the planes. So the plane is stuck to the macadam. And I'm like, is this a joke? And so we had to deal with that. We had to figure out how to get ice over there and get ice onto the tarmac and get the tires released and then shoot. And also, we have these planes for a very limited amount of time. They're very expensive. Stuff like that you don't even think about. How could that happen? And it happens.
The guys that you're renting the plane from, they don't care.
They don't care. In fact, they like that. They say, "Oh, it's more money for us,"
Right.
And in order to get onto the tarmac, both the grass tarmac and the macadam tarmac, which is surrounded by forests, I had to make sure that there were no remnant bombs from World War II buried, but I also had to make sure that there were no current bombs or things that could hurt people that might have been put into the place before we took possession of the location. So I had to hire a company. It cost me, I think, $40,000 to sweep the area for mines and all that kind of stuff.
Where was this that you
in Berlin?
You had to sweep an area for mines in Berlin.
Yeah, because they were off the beaten path. They were sort of next to the woods, and that was the real place where it happened. Nobody goes there anymore, and no one really cares about it. But I'm going to bring people in there. I'm going to bring actors in there. I have to worry about it.
Had you ever been to Germany before you made Valkyrie?
Oh, yes. I went when I first got out of college. I went to Munich for a few days, and then I kept moving into Italy. So no, I had never really been there for any length of time.
Did being in that country, well, obviously it brought a lot of feelings.
Yeah, it did. It really did. This is an interesting kind of crazy story. I keep saying what I do for a living, I never know where it's going to take me and where it's going to bring me and who I'm going to meet and who I'm going to have to deal with. When I was making Superman, one afternoon we went to a film festival. I didn't fall asleep, almost did. And this man is speaking in German and in Hebrew and then in English. And when he starts speaking English, he's got a Brooklyn accent. And I wake up and I'm looking like, who is this guy? And it turns out he's one of the chief rabbis of Poland. And I'm looking at him like, how could he be the chief rabbi of Poland with a Brooklyn accent? And it turns out that he was educated in the States. He's from Brooklyn. And he answered an ad to be a rabbi in Poland. He didn't even know it was the chief rabbi. And so he got the job. And I said to Jeannie, if I'm ever in Europe, I really want to meet this man. So here I'm now in Berlin, and I'm thinking, ooh, I wonder, Poland's not that far. I find out, oh, it's only like a 6-hour drive. I tell my assistant, find this man, and I want to talk to him, and maybe I can go visit him. So I get this guy on the phone, and I tell him I've seen his movie, and I would love to meet him. And he says, fine, come, I'm inviting you, come stay with me. And we decide on a weekend, there's a double bar mitzvah in Warsaw. And we're going to go to see the bar mitzvah and see him. So we drive to Warsaw, and we go to the bar mitzvah, and I see him, and I say to him, well, how did this happen for you? And that's where he tells me the story about answering an ad. And then he says, I'd like you to meet the chief rabbi of Germany with me because we want to show you something. And I said, wow, okay. So I meet the chief rabbi of Germany, and they take me to a synagogue. I think it's in East Berlin now. It's been funded by the German government, 6 million euros, to rebuild this synagogue, which when Hitler was there, he took it over and made it into a stable. And then it was destroyed by fire. So the new German government built this $6 million synagogue. But as both rabbis tell me, it's in an area where there are no Jews. All the Jews moved away from there. It's this gorgeous building. It's a very modern, architecturally beautiful building, but no one uses it. I thought that's kind of, strange and odd. Is that a comment on contemporary Germany, or what are they doing and why? But it was interesting that I got to see that from these rabbis' point of view. And, because of looking for a desert, for example, to do the opening of the movie, Brian De Palma, I made a movie with him early on in my career called Home Movies up at Sarah Lawrence College and in Westchester. And Brian had made a movie in Jordan recently. And he said to me, you really should talk to the Jordanians about shooting the desert in Wadi Wam. It's one of the, Lawrence of Arabia was shot there. So I went, oh, that's interesting. And I hang up and I forget about it. And 3 days later, my assistant comes in. He says, there's somebody from the King of Jordan's office on the phone for you. And I'm like, what? So I get on the phone, and this gentleman says, I am representing King Abdullah, and I would like to invite you to come to Amman, Jordan, because we'd like to discuss you using the desert. We understand you're looking for a desert. So I was like, wow, I've never been to a country like that. A couple of days later, Brian and I are talking, and he goes, you should go. Maybe we'll go there. And I'm like, well, I have a feeling if I go there, I ain't coming back. I'll be there for 24 hours, and then I'll come back in a body bag.
Oh, good relations with Jordan.
So I call them up and I go, I'm going to come. And they go, okay, so when you come, you fly to Frankfurt and go Frankfurt, Amman. We'll have someone to pick you up. And if it's okay with you, would you mind staying at the Palace? I thought that's the name of a hotel. So I go, that sounds good. Okay, I'm in.
I don't mind.
Yeah, so I'm thinking I'm going to stay at the Palace Hotel. I tell Jeannie, and off I go. I get through customs, and I'm looking around, and I just see a lot of Uzis, a lot of army with Uzis. Scared the shit out of me. I'd never really seen that before, once in Italy. So I go out, and there's the car. I get into the car, and along the way, we stop 3 times. I have to get out of the car, put my hands up on the top of the car, and be frisked. They apologize to me all 3 times. And they say, but, when you're going to the palace, we have to be extra careful. And I'm going, wow, what a hotel this must be.
What a hotel, boy. It's really exclusive.
And so sure enough, we come up to the palace. And I'm like, this is not a hotel. This is where King Abdullah lives. And this young man in a T-shirt and jeans, about 35 years old, comes over, opens the door. He's got 2 or 3 other people with him, welcomes me, and says, come on in, come on in. They usher me into, it was like a garden. They had said to me I would be meeting with King Abdullah. So when I got there, they said, well, King Abdullah can't meet with you. He's away on official business, but Prince Ali will come in and talk to you. And I'm thinking, okay, that's okay. And we sit in the garden, and they serve this delicious mint tea in a glass. And I'm talking to these 2 other young people, and I'm looking around going, where's Prince Ali? I mean, I'm sitting here 10, 15 minutes already. What the hell is going on? And so finally I hear from sort of the gate to the building, Prince Ali. And I'm thinking, oh, he's being announced. He's coming in. And I see this man come in from the gate. He walks over to the guy who's sitting across from me in the t-shirt, and he gives him a note. And the guy reads it, and he said, okay, I'll take care of that. And he leaves. And then this guy across from me in the t-shirt and I start talking. And I'm thinking, is this guy Prince Ali? Because he opened the door for me to get out of the car. And of course, it was Prince Ali. And, you know, we were talking, and I couldn't believe it. And so
You'd been having the meeting the whole time and you didn't even know it.
So after a while, he said, would you like to have lunch? Which I was starving. And I go, that would be nice. And he said, let's go inside. So we go inside, and I say to him, would you mind, could you tell me where the bathroom is? And he goes, oh, why don't you go down this corridor, take the third door, and that'll be your room. And there's a bathroom in there. So I go, oh, okay. And I'm going, where's my bag? And he goes, it's already in the room. I said, oh, okay. So I go 3 doors down, I open the door, and I'm in this room that is huge, with a huge bed. I mean, I was out of my mind. I was like, this is like a house. And I go into the bathroom, and I'm taking a pee. I'm standing there taking a pee. And the only thing I can think about is what my mother would say if she were alive. If she were alive, and I called her and said, Ma, I'm taking a pee in the palace in Amman, Jordan, and I'm staying the night in the king's castle, in the king's palace. And so I come back out, and I'm sitting there talking with him, and no lunch comes. And I'm like, didn't he say we're going to have lunch? And all of a sudden, the wall behind him slides open, and there's a dining room table filled with salads. I love salad, so I'm perfect. So we go over there, and we sit down, and we're still chatting. He was educated, I think, in England, or maybe even the States. His English is impeccable. And we're chatting, and we're having these salads, and it's delicious. And I'm like, whoa, that's fantastic. And they clear the table, and we're talking another 15 or 20 minutes. And all of a sudden, all of these servants come in with more fit food, chicken and beef and other
lamb, I would imagine.
Lamb. And it's all, this is the lunch. I go, no. Well, we just had, and I'm figuring he must have other guests coming because we already had lunch. And he goes, no, this is lunch. So we finally finished lunch, and we're really getting on very well. And he says to me, I wonder if I could ask you to do me a favor. I said, sure, what? He goes, well, there's a young American filmmaker who's making a movie here in Amman. And I promised I would go visit the set. So would you mind going with me? And I said, oh, no, of course. Now, when I first agreed to come to Amman, I said to them, I don't want anyone to know I'm in the country. I don't want any press. I don't want any publicity. I don't want to get shot. I'm just there to reconnaissance, you know. So he goes, come with me. So we get into his SUV, and like a shot, we're off. And I turn around and I see his guards jumping into cars. It's almost like a Keystone Cop. So they jump into cars to follow us because we're off and running like at 100 miles an hour. And they catch up, and we finally get to this very, very old section of Amman, and we go, and it's a very high precipice. I don't like heights. And he's marching his way to the set, and I'm following, and we're followed by guards. And so we get to the set, and there's a monitor set up for him. There's a chair next to him. I suppose that's for me, which is right behind the director's chair. And as I walk in, I hear a voice say, holy shit, is that you, Gil? Gil Adler, is that you? And it was one of our guys who had worked on Tales from the Crypt, one of the grips of the gaffers.
No shit.
And I said, holy shit, what are you doing here? And he goes, I'm a friend of the director's. You know, he lives in Santa Monica, but we came here to, and now the prince is looking at me like I know everybody, which, you know, and we sit down and we're shooting. And I didn't know this, but my driver, when I went back when I was leaving the next 2 days later, he told me this in the car. He said, are you aware that while you were sitting there, the still photographer was trying to get a shot of you and the director and you and Prince Ali, and that Prince Ali motioned him away and told him, go away with his hand. No, don't do that. And he did that because you had said you didn't want any publicity or anything. And I said, no, I didn't see him do that. I would have been okay with them taking a picture. And he said, no, he was very respectful of what you wanted. From there, they helicoptered down to the Southern Palace. And from there, I got into an SUV, followed by 2 SUVs, and we went into WWII, which I kept saying to the driver, do you know how to get us out of here? Because I don't really see how to get out of here. I don't see how we got in here. He goes, no, don't worry about that. So we looked at WWII. I got out. I took some pictures and stuff. And I went back and I spent the night at the Southern Palace. And while
how would you compare the two? Which gets the better Yelp review?
They're beautiful, both beautiful. But in the Southern Palace, I'm sitting on the veranda, and I'm saying to the guy who's sort of there to sort of make sure I'm happy. And I said, "Can I ask you a question?" And he goes, "Sure." And I go, "I don't mean this to be offensive in any way, okay?" He goes, "No, go ahead." I said, "You see over there? It looks like a roadblock. It looks like a crossing." And he goes, "Yeah, it is a crossing. That's the border with Israel." I said, "That's the border with Israel? It's probably a mile and a half away, 2 miles away." He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Well, my question is, don't you guys ever worry that, if there were a skirmish or a difficulty with Israel, that this Southern Palace would be part of Israel?" And he laughed, and he said, "Oh no, we've been friends with Israel for 30 years. The king's father was very close friends with Israel. That would never happen." And we had another drink. And then the next day, I went back to Berlin and reported to Brian with some pictures and stuff. And then went a second time with 22 people on a private jet. And the deal was I would stay in Amman to make the deal, while Brian and the crew would go to WWII and see what I saw. And then they would sleep over down in hotels down there. And then the next day they would stop on the tarmac. I would be there, get on the plane, and we'd go back to Berlin. So it was a 24-hour deal. So we did it. I got off the plane. Prince Ali was there. I brought a gift for his son. It was like we were friends now. And we go back into the palace. He says to me, "My brother is feeling very badly that he hasn't met you. But, everything I've said and everything we agreed to, he will agree to. There will not be any problem." And I said, I wasn't even thinking that there would be. And so we're sitting down and we're chatting, and his phone rings, and I see he's looking at the phone and looking at the phone, looking at the phone. And finally he looks at me and he goes, "Would you mind terribly if I answered that phone?" I said, No, of course, go ahead. No problem. And he answers the phone.
It's your country, man. You're
Right.
like,
Right.
what the fuck you want?
So the one thing I was told before I left Berlin about dealing with the king and the prince is I must remember if and when I meet the king, it's Your Royal Highness. And when I meet the prince, no, sorry, it's Your Majesty with the king. It's Your Royal Highness with the prince. Don't screw that up and don't mess it up, and make sure you do that. So I did that when I first met the prince. And now I'm back and I'm having a chat with him. And we're sort of like friendly now. And he's answering the phone. And he comes over to me and I hear this. "Yes. Yeah. No, he's with me right now." Sure, hold on. And he goes, "My brother wants to talk to you." And he hands me the phone. When he said, "My brother wants to talk to you," I didn't equate that to that's King Abdullah. So I get on
his Royal Highness, no, his Majesty. Which one was that?
So I go, "Hello?"
Faux pas number one.
And I hear a chuckle on the other end. And as I'm hearing the chuckle, I'm realizing, shit, this is the king. So I go, "Oh, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. I didn't mean to say hello. I meant to say, Your Royal Highness, Your Majesty. Your Majesty."
Which one are you?
And now he's laughing. He's really laughing. He goes, "Gil, don't worry about that stuff, okay? Don't worry about that stuff. I just wanted to call to tell you that whatever my brother agrees to, I will agree to. There will not be any problems." And I said, "No, he told me that already." And he said, "I wanted you to hear that from me." but I also wanted to tell you why I'm not there to meet you. Did he tell you where I am? And I said, no. And now I'm thinking, should I know that? And he goes, I'm in Egypt. I said, oh, okay. And he goes, do you know why I'm in Egypt? And I said, I have no idea. And he goes, I'm in Egypt and I'm meeting with the Egyptians and the Palestinians and the Israelis, and we're trying to figure this situation out. And I said, I don't mean to be impudent, but could I make a suggestion? And he said, sure. And I said, what you're doing is more important than what I'm doing. So I would encourage you to stay there as long as you have to stay there. Don't get the United States involved. You got the right players right there. And I would love to hear that you came back and you guys were able to figure it out. And he said, well, that's really good advice. I thank you for it. And we're going to try to figure it out. And when he hung up, and I went back to Prince Ali, where we had another lunch. But it was so sweet. And then when I left, there was a man named Samir, who was Prince Ali's like right-hand guy. And he took me out to buy gifts for Jeannie. And they insisted on giving me, I think, 2 or 3 gifts of different things. One was one was clothing, one was a bag to bring back for Jeannie. And I was in touch with Samir for many, many years after that. And I became friends with the king and Prince Ali. And in fact, when they would come to California, which was quite often, I would get a call saying, I don't know where you are, but if you're available, are you available for dinner? And I think I met Prince Ali once. I never was there when the king was there. So we never got together. But, when you think about what you're doing for a living and you're making movies, you don't think you're going to be exposed to anything like that. And so one of the things that happened in making the movie for me was we finished making the movie. I come back to the States. I'm now in New Orleans making another movie. I get a call from Tom, who's in Europe, and he says, look, I'm in Europe. The
Tom, you mean Tom Cruise?
Yeah. And he says, I can't make it, so maybe you can make it. The government wants to do a screening for the military. There'll be 1,000 soldiers, men and women. They'll screen the movie. You'll do a Q&A, and then they'll have a red carpet reception. So I go, I can't do that. I'm shooting a movie in New Orleans. And I go, oh, let me think about it. And I hang up. And I go into the other room and I tell Jeannie. And Jeannie goes, so what did you tell them? And I said, well, Jeannie, we're making a movie in New Orleans. How? And she goes, wait a minute. Did I hear you right? So like within 3 minutes, I'm back on the phone saying, I'll do it. We fly up to DC. They put us up in a hotel like a mile from the White House. And I thought we were doing an interesting thing and it would be a good thing. And we went to this screening and I did a Q&A. And at the end of the Q&A, I said, before we break.
What was the reception of the film? The audience enjoyed the movie?
They enjoyed the movie and they had many, many questions, a lot of questions, which was great. But they didn't ask me one question that I thought would be one of the first questions they asked me. And at the end, I said, guys, I'm really surprised. You guys are all military and men and women. And there's one question you didn't ask me, which I would have bet it was been the first question. They said, what is the question you thought? And I said, well, I have one of the biggest stars in the world. I'm a Jew. The director's a Jew. I would have thought you would have said, what did you do for security? And they all went, I had this mumbling and rumbling, and they go, well, what did you do? What did you do? And I said, well, what did you think I did? And they said, you brought guys from the US. And I said, no, with all due respect, you guys, I don't think security is one of the things that we do the best. And I needed the best. So they said, well, you got Germans. And I said, no, I don't think, if you know me, I don't think I would have trusted them to be secure for us.
They fucked up Munich too.
So they said, well, what did you do? And I said, I went to the only place I could do. I went to Mossad. And they said, Israel. I said, yeah. Who are the best guys in the world that do this stuff? Who went into Uganda? And they said, well, how do you do that? Do you just call up Mossad? And I said, no, there's a guy, that I know and I met and got to him and met from him. We got to Mossad, and these are guys who were retired, but
So,
young.
okay, so all right, so you have a connection to the Mossad. Now you had security concerns in Germany. What were your security concerns in Germany? Had
Well-
you received actual threats?
Well, in my mind, I had. I would get in the car in the morning, and they'd always have the paper, local American, the English paper. Well, one day I get into the car, and it says that Al Qaeda is in Berlin, and they're planning on blowing up a huge American installation. In my mind, I'm running a huge American installation.
Yeah.
And so I immediately get on the phone, and I call my guys. And they're laughing at me, and they're going, "We're ahead of you. We're ahead of you already." And one of my first calls was we were going to this other tarmac to shoot another group of planes. And I said, "Look, we're going to be there tomorrow. We haven't been there in a month. I need somebody out there like at 3:00 in the morning with metal detectors to make sure there's no bombs. And I want dogs sniffing. I don't want anyone on the property until you tell us it's all clear." And they said, "Gil, don't worry about it. We're ahead of you. It's all planned. You're going to get there at 7:00 in the morning. No problem." And of course, I don't believe anybody. So I'm yelling at them, "Don't tell me it's no problem. Just," and so sure, I got there the next day, and they had cleared it, and they had done all that work. But I'm thinking from this newspaper article, oh my God, they're after me. And so I was paranoid the whole time that something or somebody was going to try to hurt us. We had great security. So I go to this is in part of telling you have no idea where work leads you to. So I go to this screening, I go to the Q&A, had a lot of fun. I go to the red carpet reception, and that red carpet reception changed my life. It really changed my life and my wife's, because we met guys and gals who had no arms, no legs, no this, no that. And everyone was dressed to the nines in their military. And many of them, if they had all their limbs, you would talk to them and you would feel like you were looking through their eyes out the back of their head, that they just were vacant. And we went back to the hotel, and the two of us cried all night. I mean, we were just, it was really very difficult to take. And the next morning I was having breakfast. They had set up with a bunch of senators, about, I think it was 6 or 8 or 10 senators. And so I went to breakfast, and all they wanted to do was talk about the movie and the making of the movie. And all I wanted to do was talk about what is happening with these guys, who's helping them, how are we getting, and it got very ugly because they didn't want to answer me. They basically said, "You're a filmmaker, stick to what you know. You don't know anything, leave us alone." And so
Really?
I got very pissed off. I told them, "Go fuck yourself." And I stormed out of there. Jeannie came after me saying, "You need to go back and apologize." And I said, "I will never apologize. I can't." And from that moment on, we got involved with veterans. And I got a call one day from Debbie Reynolds out of the blue. And she says to me, "Hi, this is Debbie Reynolds. Is this Gil Adler?" And I said, "Who?" And she says, "Debbie Reynolds. I don't know if you know who I am." And I said, "Debbie Reynolds, the actress?" And she says, "Yes." I said, "Were you in Singing in the Rain? That's Debbie Reynolds?" And she says, and she laughs and she says, "Yes." And I said, "Hi, what do you want from me?" She said, "Well, I have this Thalian ball that we run every year," which I knew. I'd been to it a few times earlier on in my career. And they raise money for various charities. And it's a black tie event at a very fancy hotel in LA. And they've got wonderful entertainment. She said, "Well, this year we want to raise money for veterans. And I'm told that you're the guy to talk to because of what you're feeling." And I said, "Well, what would you want me to do?" And she said, "Produce the event." And I said, "Okay, well, let me ask you 2 questions. And if the answers to these 2 questions are no, then I'm very much the wrong guy." And the 2 questions are as follows. Do you charge any administration for the Thalians off of the money that's raised? And there was this pause, and she said, I think I better tell you the answer that you want to hear, which is what we will do. And the answer is no, we will take nothing. We usually do, but we will take nothing. I said, okay. And my second question is, how long will it take from the event and the collection of the money until the money is distributed to whomever we decide will get the money? And she said, and it was quiet on her side. And she said, how long are you thinking? And I said, no more than 60 days. And she said, we can do that. And so I found myself producing this event. And what we did was we produced an event at the Playboy Mansion. We honored Hefner. I'm friends with a couple of guys from Guns N' Roses. They said, absolutely, we're there. I brought in 3 or 4 comics from Vegas who I'm friendly with, including Rich Little, who was just a gem. You know, when I called him, I didn't know him very well. When I called him, I said, look, I'll put you up anywhere you want to stay in New York, in Los Angeles for this event. And his manager.
Whose house did he stay at?
Well, at my house.
Because, yeah, you can stay anywhere, end up staying at your house.
Well, he said to me, his agent called the next day and she said, where are you staying? And I said, I live in LA. And she said, I know, where are you staying? And I said, well, I'm going to stay home. And she said, how big is your home? And I said, well, I have a couple of guest rooms. And she said, that's where he wants to stay. He doesn't want any money to be spent on him. And so Rich Little came down, stayed in our house.
You have a house guest.
Stayed in our house. And the next morning, when I went to the sound check for the event, which was on that Saturday night, about 11 o'clock in the morning, Jeannie calls me and she goes, where are you? I thought you said you were only going to be there an hour for the sound check. I said, well, we got some problems I got to deal with. I said, why? She said, well, Rich is making breakfast and wants to know when you're coming back. And I got back about an hour later and he yelled at me because the eggs were going to get cold and he made breakfast for us. That's the kind of guy Rich Little is. Rich Little did, more time than I thought. He was hilarious. And he really went out of his way to help us raise the money for the veterans. We raised $1 million that night for a group called Operation MEND, M-E-N-D, at UCLA. And they supply mental health and plastic surgery for veterans. And then from that, I sort of lost interest in producing. I thought, my God, this is a much bigger thing. This is a bigger problem. And so I spent the next 5 years of my life out of the industry and just trying to figure out how to raise more money for veterans.
Yeah.
So you never really understand, where these things will take you. You think you're a producer and you think you want to make entertainment. And all of a sudden you don't want to make entertainment because there's something that's bigger and more passionate you feel about.
It was a bigger, more important story than any movie script that you were.
Totally. And the thing that kept me going in Germany, because every weekend I would say to Jeannie, I want to get on a plane. I want to get out of here. Let the lawyers figure it out. And she would come to me with a double scotch and I would have a scotch. I would pass out and I'd wake up the next day and she'd send me off. The car's waiting downstairs. You got to go. And she would send me off. And so the only respite I had was on the weekends where I would basically just collapse and I was exhausted. But she would say, you got to get out. You got to get fresh air. And we got to get some good food in you. And so we would walk to this marketplace. And this marketplace had everything. It was beautiful. And they had they had a few trucks, not many, of food. And there was one guy selling falafels. And so we got online and we got to the front of the line. And this man was an Arab, Faisal, spoke only Arabic and German. I don't even speak Hebrew. And so I spoke only English and a smattering of French. And as the weekends progressed, we would come every weekend. He would make our falafel. And then we realized when we would get there, he and I would start talking. And the line would just wait. And the line would get involved in the conversation we would have because they would be so perplexed. Like, how are these two guys talking? They don't even know what they're talking about. But we talk with our hands and we talk with, facial expressions. And we became really good friends. And we would come there and he would say, oh, while you're waiting for your falafel here, I've made you a special mint tea. which would be delicious. And because he would sell that. So he would say, no, I made it. You ordered it earlier. Here's your mint tea. And one of the things I looked forward to most was seeing Faisal on the weekend. And the last time we saw him was the week before we left Berlin. And we went there and I told him this was it. And we hugged, and it was a tough moment.
But one of the nice things about making movies for a living, as you said, it presents you doors you would never be presented with otherwise, and it puts you into contact with people you'd have never met otherwise.
And exposes you to things you've never heard of, thought of. I mean, had you said to me 5 years before that, you're going to raise money for veterans, I would have said to you, you're out of your mind, because I don't know anything about veterans. I'm not a veteran. Everybody used to always say, oh, when did you serve? I'm not a veteran. I have flat feet and I have a heart murmur, and they didn't want me. And so I never served. But all of a sudden I felt this passion about something's got to be done for these people. They're suffering.
There are many ways to serve.
Many ways to serve. Yeah.
So long as you serve, that's all that matters.
Absolutely. And in fact, maybe we should mention what we're doing an event.
As a
raise
matter
money.
of fact, yeah.
We're raising money for veterans. There's a group in Tennessee, and they give money to veterans if they can't make the rent, if they can't make the car payment, if they can't pay the phone bill, they can't pay for food. It's an immediacy, unlike what I've done in the past where we raised money for mental health and for plastic surgery. This is an immediacy. They don't have the money to get through to the next day.
Yeah.
And so we're doing this event in December. We'll talk more about it next week, and the week after we'll have more specific dates. I think we talked about the 16th of December.
Yep, 16th of
And
December.
we invite everyone to come and join us and make the contribution as best you can, whatever you can. I think we're suggesting no less than $15, but
Right.
if you can't afford $15, we'll take whatever you can.
Ever $1, it will go literally right
To the veterans.
And the way that Gil asked those questions before of Debbie Reynolds, it's the same deal here. The goal is every dollar goes into their hands and helps them and nobody else.
So please participate with us and come back and hear what we have to say. It'll be a great conversation because we're talking with some wonderful filmmakers about horror.
We are.
And we're talking about the A-list of filmmakers and why they do horror and what it means to them and why they got involved and how they got involved. And there's an opportunity for you to ask us all questions.
Indeed. Joy and Jolts is what we're probably going to call it. But we'll talk about that in greater detail in the weeks and episodes ahead. So doing this movie it changed your life in so many ways. In essence, you produced a movie for that Brandon was in the one in New Orleans after this, but really your taste for it vanished up until recently.
Yeah, it really did. I would say to Jeannie, I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't have the mojo. I don't have the passion. There's nothing driving me. And what's driving me is I got to get more money for the veterans. I got to figure out a way to get more money.
Did anything about the experience of making Valkyrie contribute to that?
Oh, everything about making Valkyrie contributed to that. Everything. But but what was really the button on it was going to that event in Washington, D.C. I didn't have any clue how huge the problem was. Because here I was looking at 1,000 men and women in Washington, D.C. But then I went back and I thought, my God, if there are 1,000 people in DC, there are more than that in DC. How many are in New York or Chicago or Washington or Washington State or LA or on and on and on? And I felt a little overwhelmed by the whole thing initially. And then I just said, no, I just have to do it one step at a time. If I can raise $1, that's $1 more. I can't solve the problem myself. But if I can just participate in making other people aware and getting more people involved and raising more money, that's what I want to do. And that's what I did for 5 years. I still think about it quite often, on the anniversary. I mean, I went to Stauffenberg's house, and it's now 3 condos. But I went to the house in Potsdam because all the Jews lived in Potsdam, and then when Hitler came to power, he got rid of all of them, and all the generals were living there. And so I went to his house, and I put my hand on the gates, and I just squeezed the gates, and I could feel something. Now, maybe it's my craziness, my mentalness, but I could feel something. I could feel him there. I could feel what he thought, and it just made a big difference to me. And the only other story I'll tell you is when we had these problems getting permission, and Schirmacher, Franz Schirmacher, got us permission and wrote that article. We then he set up a meeting one night at his house, and we went there, and I was very rude to Dr. Wilhelm, and I left because I was very upset that they had taken away a right that they had given us. And he was there to give us the right back. But before that, I was with Franz Schirmacher in the backyard, and he lived on a body of water. Just his backyard ended, and there was like a lake. And he said, "You see to the right, to the left, you see that little island? That's where not Goering,
Goebbels.
Goebbels. That's where Goebbels, because he was head of publicity. That's where his girlfriend stayed, and you could see the boat coming and going.
He was the propaganda minister.
Yeah, you could see his boat coming and going from there during the war from this vantage point. And you see that building over there? That's where the Potsdam Accord was made, where they divvied up how Germany was going to be after the war.
Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt.
Yeah. And I said to him, "Can I ask you a question that you may not want to answer? You're living in a lovely house. I see the house to the right is beautiful, but the house to the left is a mess. It's all disheveled, and it's a mess. It's just, they should tear it down." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, that house was lived in by the Kapinski brothers, who had the Kapinski hotels in Europe, and they lived in the basement and under the basement during the war. One of them was captured and killed, and the other one survived. But," he said, the government of Germany won't let anybody take possession of that house until they find someone related to the Kapinskis to allow that to happen. And all the Kapinskis were killed. And so the house sits like that because they can't find someone to give permission.
They can't find an heir.
Can't find an heir that would give permission. And that was 2005, and it sits there today, I believe. So when you hear stories like that and you see things like that, and you're right there, and it's right in front of your face, it really has an effect on you.
While you were there, did you go to any of the death camps?
No, I couldn't. I had been to Dachau 20 years earlier, and I had a rough time being there. And I really wanted to go when I was in Poland, when I was in Warsaw. I really wanted to go, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I just said I won't be able to go back to work. And so no, we didn't go to any camps.
The movie, at the end of the day,
It did well.
Yeah.
It did well. Yeah. Did it do what they wanted it to do? I don't know, because I never know what they want it to do. They want every movie to be $500 million, $1 billion. But it was a respectable movie. People from all walks of life have come to me when I speak at universities or I speak at festivals or wherever to say it's one of their favorite movies, or they really, really like the way it was told so honestly.
For a lot of the critics, it all came down to Tom Cruise. It was a lot of them obsessed on that and whether that was a good choice or not.
Yeah. And I didn't care about that. I cared about the story. I cared about I cared about what I always cared about, the emotionality of the telling of the story. And did we accomplish that?
It's a well-made movie.
I think we did. Thanks for saying that.
It is. It does exactly. It's a story that needs to be told about some very courageous people. Yeah, could they have been more courageous more quickly? Of course.
Yeah.
But we're living through some strange times, and we are getting, which is why I think talking about this movie today is incredibly timely. Where we are revisiting similar impulses by some people, and watching some people produce courage and some people show up with none. It's remarkable how history keeps repeating itself.
And day to day, things would change. Day to day, I was confronted with problems and issues that some were crazy insurmountable, some were easily fixed. And one day, we had selected this house in Potsdam to be the house which we would use for the conspirators to meet. It was a craftsman house, which it was a craftsman house originally. We wanted it to be as authentic as possible. We had like 10 houses to choose from. We chose this one house, and we're shooting there. Tom's there, and I had my Mossad guys at the doors and guards, and somebody comes over to me and they said, there's a woman in the front gate. She's very elderly. She's with what looks like her granddaughter, probably a woman in her 20s, and she's banging with her umbrella on the gate. She needs to speak to the man in charge. And I said, about what? And she said, they won't say. And I said, well, does she look dangerous? I mean, does she look like she's carrying a bomb or something? And he said, no, she must be in her 80s, maybe older. And I said, okay, well, why don't you go with me and let's see what this is about. And I went out to the gate, and I could see she was sweaty. It was a very hot day, and she was uncomfortable. And I said, she was very agitated. And I said, calm down. Why don't you come inside and sit in the shade and talk? And she said, why are you in this house? How did you know to be in this house? Where did you get to? And I said, just come inside. And we sat down. She sat on a chair, and I sat on the couch. And I usually sit on the couch. I always do this with my back to the side of the couch, to the arm, and my legs sort of 3/4 out. And I sat down like that, and she got all agitated again. She says, why are you sitting like that? Who told you to sit like that? How did you know how to sit like that? And I said, could you ask and it was her grandmother, to just relax and speak slowly, and you could tell me what she's asking and what she wants? And the woman said to me the following, which drove me crazy. She said, this was my house, and this was where the perpetrators met. My husband was one of the leaders. And she goes over, we're in the living room, and in between the living room and the kitchen, there's this huge, heavy glass, like a light blue door. I didn't even know they were doors. I just thought it was glass. And she goes over and she starts pulling on the door. And I go, please tell her to stop doing that. I don't want to. And she goes, no, it's a door. And she opens it, goes into the kitchen. And she said, Papa told us he was going to be in this other room, and he closed the glass doors, and he told us not to make a sound and stay in the kitchen and don't listen. And I'm now getting goosebumps. And then she gets up and she goes over to these craftsman-like stairs, like a circular dark wood staircase. And she goes like 4 or 5 steps up. Now we're shooting upstairs. I'm going, no, don't go upstairs. Don't go upstairs. And she takes her umbrella and she hits a metal plaque, not a plaque, a metal covering, like for a radiator. And she smacks it. And she says to the daughter and the granddaughter says to me, that's where we hid the bombs. That's where they were, behind there. And I'm like, could this be real?
History walked in the door.
So I go over to Tom and I go, Tom, I tell him what's going on. I go, and then she says to me, any chance I can meet the star?
Finally, there's some quid pro quo.
Yeah, and I said, maybe. And I went over to Tom and I told him, and he said, is she real? I said, I think she is. I really do think she is. She's an elderly. Why would she say this story? So he went over and he spoke to her and she was all excited. But how's that that's the house we were in. It was the real house that actually happened in.
And the woman who lived there during the time came to
Tell us that.
to authenticate.
Yeah, and to meet Tom Cruise.
At the end, at the end of the day, it's always about Tom Cruise in that movie. And you are going to continue to do.
And we're continuing doing it, but then I reconnected with you, and the spark just came back about doing what we're doing.
There's a movie line. Every time I try to get out, they drag me back in. It's from The Godfather, something like that. Yeah, I sucked you right back in. It's all my fucking fault.
That's it.
I guess in a way, as Bordello of Blood did, this changed direction yet again.
Yeah. And I think about both of those movies today quite often. I really do. And how they changed my life, and what if I did it over? How could I do it differently? What would I do? How would that be? But something, it doesn't really matter because you can't.
And that's a podcast for another day.
And for another day, we'll have it.
And on that note, thank you, everybody. We'll catch you next time. The How Not to Make a Movie podcast is executive produced by me, Alan Katz, by Gil Adler, and by Jason Stein. Our artwork was done by the amazing Jody Webster, and Jason, Jody, along with Mando, are all the hosts of the fun and informative Dads from the Crypt podcast. Follow them for what my old pal the Crypt Keeper would have called terrific crypt content.